Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sukkah daf Lamed. Today's daf is dedicated by Jennifer and Daniel Goretz in memory of Rachel Chela Goretz of blessed memory on the occasion of her second Yurtzeit. Okay, we're in one of the most basic sugyot today of this Masechet, and we're going to get into all sorts of interesting things that are more topics for a Masechet like Bava Kama, which talk about theft and ownership and all sorts of interesting things. So with that, we're going to get started. We ended yesterday and I specifically stopped and didn't go more in depth. We're going to go more in depth today into this question. It's said in the Mishnah, lulav gazul and lulav hayavesh, and all sorts of other lulavim that are problematic to use on the holiday. And then the Gemara said, kapasik vitane. Pasik vitane means the Mishnah didn't specify, it just said it flat out without specifying any sort of distinction, which seems like a lulava pasul is going to be disqualified not only on the first day, but also on all the subsequent days. Again, there was this bit of a problem because the Gemara said the language, used the language of Yom Tov Sheni rather than all the other days. Okay, what most of the Mefarshim assume that they really mean all the other days and not specifically the second day of the holiday in Chutz La'aretz, for example. That would be the only option for Yom Tov Sheni, would be the second day of Yantif in, outside of Israel, where they keep 2 days. The problems with that interpretation is, number one, in the time of the Mishnah, they were really living based in Israel. Most of the rabbis, it would be strange they'd be making a reference to, that they're referring to the Mishnah. It's actually the Gemara speaking, but they're referring to what the Mishnah was talking about, where most people in the time of the Mishnah were in Israel. There was no Yom Tov Sheni. Secondly, in general, we say that the laws of Yom Tov Sheni are the same for Yom Tov Rishon. So theoretically, this should really be the same, in which case there wouldn't even be a thought to make a distinction. So in any case, let's assume that what this means is all the subsequent days. So now, if that's the case, we understand Yavesh, it applies to all the days because it needs to be Hadal. But Gazul, stolen, isn't that all because of Lachem, Mishalachem, has to be yours, and you don't own something stolen? To which Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rav Shimon ben Yochai, Mishum dahavele mitzvah haba ba'avera. It's a different issue. The Lulav Gazul is not because you don't own it, and it's not your own, but it's because you are now taking this implement that you stole and using it to do a mitzvah. That is totally inappropriate, right? Now, how do we know this? Shneimar, it says in the verse, and this we're going to quote a verse from the Navi Malachi, one of Treasar. Behevetim gazul ve'eta pisech ve'eta chole. Okay, you have to read the whole pasuk. Okay, so now it says, "Va'amartem hena." I'm going to skip the beginning of the pasuk. Vehevetem gazul ve'eta pisech ve'eta chole. What God's saying is, you bring to me these animals for sacrifices that are stolen. Right? We know throughout the Nevi'im that God criticizes the people, or the Nevi'im, the prophets criticize the people for their inappropriate way of sacrifices. Right? That we had Echtav Ashuv. We talked about that in Yoma, right? I'll sin and I'll immediately repent, and then I'll bring my sacrifices, and then I'll do it again, and I'll just keep doing it, keep bringing sacrifices, right? That's not appropriate. So here, it's these moral ethical problems, right? That here, instead of you worshiping God, what are you doing? Well, you're worshiping God and then going to say, oh, I'll bring my sacrifice and wipe myself clean, and then go do it again. So likewise here, you bring to God, what do you bring him? A sacrifice that was stolen. You bring a stolen animal. Ve'eta piseach, or an animal that's lame. Ve'eta choleh, or a sick animal. Ve'hevetem eta mincha ha'achrona, eta mincha, ha'ertzeu tami edchem, amar Hashem. You think I want this, God says to them? Of course I don't want this. Likewise, when you bring a lulav that you stole and you use that as your mitzvah, of course God doesn't want that. What's the point? Right? That's not the point of a mitzvah. Again, this goes back to the previous chapter where we talked about how seik b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. The idea of mitzvot is not to do a check and say, okay, I did this, I did that, I did that. No, it's the idea, especially if we go back to the Ran, of being involved in the worship of God. The worship of God does not involve stealing items in order to be worshiping God. It's not what God wants. So now they say, what do we learn from this pasuk? Gazul, now, this is a classic Gemara thing that they do. They do it with Mishnayot, and here they're doing it with a pasuk, which is two words are juxtaposed, gazul and pisach. They say like this, gazul dumia de pisach. It must be that the gazul is similar to the pisach. If they're put next to each other in the verse, there must be a certain similarity about them. Ma pisach leitle takanta, af gazul leitle takanta. Just like a lame animal can't be fixed. That's right. That's the way it's going to be forever. Likewise, a stolen thing can't ever be fixed, meaning you can't ever bring it as a sacrifice. There's no way to fix this and make it good. Okay, now the Gemara is going to add this point. Lo shnaim, from here we're going to get into all sorts of basic issues about theft and ownership. Lo shna lifnei yeush, v'lo shna la'achar yeush. Not only before the owners have given up. If I steal your I'm not going to your house and I steal your dishes. Okay, maybe a strange thing to steal. I steal your iPad. Okay, I go and I steal your iPad. Now, when at some point you're going to say, I'm never going to see that iPad again, right? You get robbed. You assume it's gone, right? In the beginning, you hold out hope. Maybe I'll get it back. You go to the police. They check around. They do some fingerprint checking. But you really know, I mean, certainly I know this is the case where I live in Ranana. You know when that stuff is stolen, you're never seeing it again, right? It's quite unlikely. And even if you hold out hope, at a certain point, you're going to say, I'm never getting this back. That's what we call yeush. When you have yeush, and now this is the big question. Well, the way Jewish law looks at gzela, at theft, is that at a certain point, the owner gives up hope of ever seeing that item again. And when that happens, it's a very strange thing to think about, but the person who stole it actually gains ownership of it. Okay, let me give you a better example. When you find a lost item on the ground, you pick it up, right? Now, depending on what it is, if it has simanim, let's say it's a ring or a bracelet, and, you put up signs in the town and say, lost ring, lost bracelet, and, and then people come and they say, oh yeah, it had a stone like this and it looked like that. And then you give it back to them when they find it. But let's say a long time goes by, let's say a year passes and nobody's claimed that. You can assume that there was yeush. Okay, we're going to learn this all in Bava Metzia. At that point, you become the owner of that lost item. Or a better example, you find $20 on the street. As soon as you find that money, you can assume that the owner gave up on ever finding it, because the owner is going to assume that in the middle of the street, right? Let's say you're in the center of Manhattan and you find a $20 bill on the floor. There's no way that person ever thought he was getting that money back. So you can take it and keep it. It's yours. There's a machloket about whether this works in theft or not. Okay, so whether yeush works. So now they're going to say, let's assume, this assumes yeush does work, meaning as soon as the owner gives up hope of ever receiving it. Now, while it's true that if I stole something from you, I stole your iPad. So I actually have to return it. Right? I'm supposed to return what I stole. But the rabbis instituted, in order to make it, it's very hard for me to ever admit that I stole something once I've used it and I've done things with it and it's mine. Right? I kind of use it as if it's mine. So the rabbis instituted that I could return the value of it instead of the item itself. So since that's the case, the item itself actually is acquired by me. Once you have yeush, once you give up rights of ownership to it, then give up hope of ever finding it, it becomes mine. But I still have to return the value of it, right? If I ever come forward and admit, or they find me and they catch me that I'm the one who stole it, then I'll obviously have to pay the money. Okay, so that's yeush in a nutshell. Okay, we're going to get into more about yeush, that there's, even if you hold yeush doesn't work, maybe some other things really work, but in any case, they're going to say like this. Since the gazul is mentioned next to the pisach, and the pisach can never be fixed, likewise, the gazul can never be fixed. It can never be used as sacrifice, even if you actually become the owner. It doesn't have to do with ownership. It doesn't matter if I own the animal, because technically I stole it. Now it becomes mine. It's true, I still owe you money for it, but the animal actually becomes mine. I still can't use it as sacrifice. It can never be used as sacrifice because, why is that? So now let's explain. Before the owners give up hope and it still belongs to them technically, it says in the verse, a different verse, Adam ki yakriv mikem. Okay, this is a pasuk in Vayikra, Perek Aleph, pasuk bet, the very beginning of Vayikra. Adam ki yakriv mikem, from you. That means from your own items. That's like lachem. Okay, so therefore, if it's before Yeush, obviously you can't bring something that doesn't belong to you. Amar Rachmana, the pasuk says, "V'lav didehu," and this isn't yours. Ela la'achar Yeush, but after Yeush, hakanya b'Yeush. Since I acquired it, I should be able to use it. So now, again, what you see here is a very similar structure to our Gemara, which is originally they think that the issue is you have to be the owner. In the end, they're going to say it has nothing to do with that because not that it has nothing to do with it, but there's an additional issue that even if you are the owner, okay, Ella, la'achar Yeush, hakanya b'Yeush, so you own this, so then it would be still mikem, and that would fulfill the verse. Elalav mishum dahavele mitzvah haba ba'avera. So now they prove that it must be that it's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. This is a mitzvah, right? This is an ethical problem that you stole this animal. So yes, technically speaking, you own it, but we don't care if you own it. The fact is it's a stolen item. God doesn't want stolen items brought as sacrifices. Likewise, God doesn't want us to use a lulav. From here, we're going to stop for a moment and brief pause and go and look at a Tosfot because it's a very big machloket about this concept of mitzvah ba'avera on a few issues. Okay, so the first thing is Tosfot on the fourth line of Mishum Dahavele Mitzvah Ba'avera says, Afal gav dekha gabe korban ktiv. Okay, even though this pasuk is said about sacrifices, he says, Huadim b'chol mitzvot. This concept of mitzvah ba'avera applies to all commandments, which makes sense, right? Why? Dahavia de'oraita, because this is de'oraita. How do we know it's de'oraita? It proves it from a different sugya, which talks about harei gazal se'ah shel chitin, if you steal wheat, okay, and then v'tachana v'afa'a, and then you grind it and you make it into bread. V'ifurish mimena chala, and then you separate chala. De'ein ze mevarech ela min ha'etz, and then you want to make a blessing on this chala. You can't make a blessing on that. That's like disgracing God rather than blessing God because you're taking something stolen and then blessing God with it. That's inappropriate. So based on that, now it's a little bit of a different issue, and I'm not going to get into all the depth of this. There's a lot to go there. But based on this, Tosfot basically says that this is a de'oraita issue and it applies to all mitzvot. Okay, what's interesting is there's a Tosfot on Daf Tet, where we were talking about Sukkah Gzula. And there, Tosfot actually said that mitzvah ba'avera is derabbanan, not de'oraita. Okay, so there's an interesting, Tosfot, by the way, is different people. It's not all the same person. It was a group of rabbis in France in the 1200s to 1400s. And it makes sense that maybe there might be a discrepancy between a Tosfot here and a Tosfot there. Anyway, that's a whole other issue. I'm not going to get into that. But that's number one issue. But the main thing here is that Tosfot says this applies to all mitzvah. Now, not everybody agrees that this applies to all mitzvot. Okay, there's a debate about this. And some people say it doesn't apply to all mitzvot. What would be the similarity between lulav and korban? Well, think about korban. What's korban? Korban is what we call ritzui. And Rav Soloveitchik built on this idea. And he said, and this connects with something we talked about yesterday, which is that he, based on this connection, this comparison, and based on what we said about lulava yavesh, that according to the Yerushalmi, it's because lo hametim hallelujah. We don't want, right? Dead things can't praise God, right? Dead people can't, dead lulavs can't. That it connects this idea between lulav and praising God, and the fact that we shake it during Hallel. In fact, even the Mishnah, I didn't discuss this yesterday, but the shiur of a lulav, if you notice, it has to be tall enough to be able to shake it. That shows that the shaking of the lulav, which is done also when you make the blessing, but it's mainly done during Hallel, is the main part of the mitzvah. If you can't shake it, then it's not, you have a full, right? It doesn't have enough to shake it. It's not a good lulav. So from here, you see that this is this idea that the lulav was used as a type of worship of God. Ritzui is appeasement of God. We're appeasing God. That's what we're doing when we shake the lulav and when we do it during Hallel. And it's a part of worship. And in worship, there's no space for mitzvah ba'avera, but possibly in other mitzvot, it wouldn't be such an issue. So there's this debate about how far we take mitzvah ba'avera. Is it across the board or not necessarily? Very interesting debate. Again, a lot more to be said about this topic. We're going to move on. So that was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. He said this whole issue, and the reason why the Mishnah didn't distinguish between the first day and all the other days is because it's a mitzvah ba'avera, and that would apply across the board to all the days. Another statement, he says, in a similar vein, he also said it in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. My dichtiv ki ani Hashem ohev mishpat, sonei gezel ba'olah, another verse from the prophets. This is from Yeshayahu. I am God who loves mishpat. I love righteous, judgment, proper judgment. I hate gezel ba'olah. I despise theft when it comes to a korban olah. The olah is the one that's sacrificed entirely to God. What did we say about this? Mashal lemelech basar vadam. This is like, a parable, an example of a king. Shaya over al beit hameches. He would pass by the tax office. Amar lavadav tnu meches lemochsim. He would say to his servants, give taxes for me to the tax authority. Amrulo, follow kolameches kulo shalchahu. What's the point of you giving taxes? All the taxes in the end go to you. Amar lahem, mimeni yilmadu kol ovrei drachim v'lo yavrichu atzmam min hameches. I have to be an example. If I give taxes, everyone else will learn to give taxes, right? If I avoid taxes and I don't pay taxes, and everyone else is going to not pay taxes, right? We know this is classic of our leaders. We have to hold our leaders. Our leaders are expected to behave in a way that they want people to learn from them, even if in the end it doesn't really mean anything because it's all going back to them. Still, they have to show, right? Don't evade taxes. Even I don't evade taxes. So what's the mashal? Even God says, Ani Hashem sonei gezel ba'olah. Mimeni yilmadu banai v'yavrichu atzmam min hagezel. Also, I say, I would hate gezel in an olah. Now, what's an olah? An olah goes entirely to God. Now, you might say, even if someone stole it, the fact is everything belongs to God in the end anyway, right? So it's not really stolen because it's going back to God and it came from God. And so therefore, what's the difference? Why would God hate stolen items? It was his to begin with. It's his now. The point is, God has to say, now, it's not an exact comparison. You can raise a lot of questions on this. But the idea is that God can say, look, if I hate stolen items, that will show an example to everybody else that they should also hate stolen items and not accept gifts from stolen items. Okay, so here we see again, God doesn't want gifts. Again, you see it in a worship framework, in sacrifices. Itmar Nami, it was also said, Amar Rabbi Ami, Yavesh pasul mipnei she'en hadal. Kazul pasul mishum dahavene mitzvah haba ba'aver. Okay, another statement. You can see they're really trying to prove this point, hone it in, because it seems, number one, the obvious of lulav gazul is this idea of lakachtam lachem. So they're trying to tell you, no, there's something additional going on here. Because again, the lachem would only be by Yom HaRishon, because that's what the verse says. You should take from yourself on the first day, and other laws about that are only relevant to the first day. Like you can't borrow a lulav on the first day. So they're trying to prove further that this lulav gazul has something additional going on here, which would then apply to all 7 days, which is this concept of mitzvah haba ba'aver. Comes though, and now you see why they're really trying to prove this, because it seems like there's another opinion here. Upliga de Rabbi Yitzchak. This disagrees with Rabbi Yitzchak. De Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Bar Nachmani, Amar Shmuel. He says in the name of Shmuel, Lo shanu ela b'yom tov rishon, ava b'yom tov sheni. He disagrees with everything we built until now. He says, no, this is only on the first day. But b'yom tov sheni, which again, let's assume, means the rest of the week. Mitoch sheyotzei b'shaul, since you can take a borrowed one and use it, yotzei nami b'gazul. He thinks borrowed, stolen is all the same issue. All has to do with ownership. Now, there's a debate about Shmuel. Does Shmuel hold there is no such thing as mitzvah ba'avera? Just doesn't apply. Very simply, doesn't apply. There is no such thing, which is very interesting that he would hold that, because it seems like a very obvious thing to us, but maybe not. He disagrees with that, and that's the simple reading of Shmuel. Alternatively, you could say, since the mitzvah of lulav is only deoraita on the first day, the mitzvah haba ba'avera is only a problem on day number 1. But once you get into the Rabbanit, and it's only a mitzvah by rabbinic law, then if you steal it, it's not as big a deal. It's not like a slap in the face of God, because God didn't command us to take a lulav for all 7 days. Only commanded us for the first day. So some people understand, Shmuel, that there is a concept of mitzvah ba'avera, but it would only apply on a deoraita level. Okay, that's if you look in Tosfot, the last Tosfot on the page, mitoch sheyotzei b'shaul yotzei b'gazul, what we just read, that line says, hacha dafka shu b'dmi derabanan lo chayesh ha mitzvah ba'avera. So that's Tosfot's understanding. Okay, that he does hold that way. He just doesn't think it applies here. So let's move on now. Let's continue with him. So now we have this question on Shmuel. Mativ Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. He now questions Shmuel's approach here. Lulav hagazul v'hayavesh pasul. Now, notice what's missing from that list. Lulav hashaul, a borrowed lulav, which we know is disqualified on day number 1, but not on the other days. So hashaul kasher, it sounds like, since it doesn't mention a borrowed one, it sounds like it must be, it's okay. Now, why would it be okay? Emat, when? Ilema biyom tov lishon, if you're going to say on day number 1, haktiv lachem mishalachem, it can't possibly be. If you think our Mishnah, like Shmuel says, is only talking about day number 1, with the lulav gazul anyway, stolen is only problem on day number 1, like borrowed, then it should have said borrowed, right? If borrowed, the fact that it doesn't list borrowed, it means borrowed is allowed, but borrowed isn't allowed on day number 1, because you need haktiv lachem mishalachem, it needs to be your own. V'hai lav didehu, and this one isn't his. It must be the second, the rest of the days. And then what's it coming to say? The katane gazul pasul, and then it's telling you stolen is a problem even throughout all the other days. It seems pretty simple. So that's really a question on Shmuel. So Amar Rava, le'olam, here comes his answer. He gives an answer for Shmuel, how you could read the Mishnah and still think it's only talking about day number 1, even though it doesn't mention borrowed. Le'olam b'yom tov lishon. The lo mebaya kama. It's a lo mebaya structure. What's a lo mebaya structure? It means lo mebaya shaul. You don't even need to say. It didn't mention shaul, not because it's not, again, shaul means borrowed. It didn't mention borrowed, not because borrowed is permitted. Borrowed is forbidden. It just didn't need to mention it because it's obvious. So lo mebaya shaul de lav didehu. Not, right, we didn't even need to mention borrowed because for sure it's a problem, again, assuming the subject is only day number 1. Of course it's forbidden on day number 1 because it needs to be your own, and this is not your own. Aval gazul, emastam gzula yeush balim hu uchidi dedami. But gazul, you might have thought, in other words, the whole chidush, that the new teaching in this Mishnah is that gazul, a stolen one, you might have thought that maybe it's your own. Why? Because usually when people steal, there's yeyush. Usually if I go, again, my house was robbed at some point, I assumed that morning I will never see my stuff again. And it was true. I really didn't. It was gone forever. So you might think that usually gzula is stam yeush ba'alim. And once it's yeush ba'alim, I could actually use it because it's mine, because I own it, right? Again, if I'm the one who stole, before I was describing, I was the one who was robbed. But if I stole, it would be mine. And therefore, uchedidedami, and it's mine. And therefore, or it's like mine. And therefore, I could use it. Okay, if I stole it, because I can assume the owner thinks he's never getting it back. Kamash malan, and here it's a bit of a tricky kamash malan. Kamash malan means, therefore, the Mishnah is coming, that the new teaching in the Mishnah is, obviously you can't use gazul because it's not yours, okay? And then that's obviously Shaul borrowed because it's not yours. You can't use on day number 1. Now, gazul, you might have thought it's your own because of Yeush, because you can assume there was Yeush. Kamash malan. Now, what does kamash malan mean? Well, therefore, it teaches you that it's not true. What's not true? So option number 1 is to say, it's not true that most people have Yeush. Or maybe we have to be concerned for the minority that don't have Yeush and that you don't really own it, okay? That's option number 1. Option number 2, and this is a more interesting one, especially if you're struggling, which I always struggle with this concept, and I think many people do, that what I stole something, it becomes mine. Maybe what it's saying is, even though you stole it, and even though there's Yeush generally, and you can assume that the owner gave up his rights to this, it's sort of yours, but not really yours. It's not yours enough to be called lachem. That's a different interpretation that I want to suggest, which then makes us feel a little bit better about this idea that stolen items, what, become your own? And how could that possibly be? Maybe it's saying that, and it's not exactly mitzvah baba avera, but what it's saying is this concept of lachem, it has to be fully yours. This is somewhat yours. That's the concept that I stole something and they gave up on it, and I can say this is now mine. It's not exactly mine. I still have to pay back the value of it to them, and it really is stolen. So maybe what it's saying is, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of lachem, it has to be 100% yours, even though legally it's yours. Right? Legally, halachically, you can say, technically speaking, this is mine. but in a sense, to fulfill this mitzvah, it's not really yours. Okay, that's like another different way of understanding it. So either the Kamash Malan is saying, you can't assume there was Yeush, and therefore you don't own it, or even you might own it, but it's still not exactly fully yours, enough to fulfill this lachen. So therefore, we've now explained the Mishnah that the Mishnah could be referring to only the first day, and it didn't mention Baro because that was obvious. Okay, so either it didn't mention Baro because it's not the case, because again, the Mishnah was talking about all 7 days, and then we have to say it's all because of mitzvah ba'avera and not an ownership issue, or it's an ownership issue and it has to do with day number 1. And the point is, Gazul, you might have thought is really yours. It's not. Amar lehu Rav Huna lahanu avankari. What is avankari? So avankari are middlemen who would be the people, Jewish people, who sold the hadassim. Okay, we're going to talk about hadassim, which is one of the 4 minim you're supposed to take on Sukkot. They would sell them to people. Okay, they're Jewish people. They're peddlers. Okay, middlemen. Kizavintu asa me'akum lo tigzizun atun ela ligzizuze ligazizuha inhu v'yaviluch. This is going to take a little while to understand, so patience. When these middlemen buy, okay, what do? They take the hadassim and they sell them. They get them from somebody's field. So now we're going to say if they take them from akum, pagans, what should they do? They shouldn't cut them from the field themselves. They shouldn't go into the field and cut the hadassim from there. Okay, and now we're going to get into all issues of ownership and transfers of ownership. Ella ligzizuhu inhu v'yavu lechu. Have the akum, the non-Jews, the pagans, let them cut the hadassim, sell them to you, and then you sell them to everybody else. Why? So now we have to understand this. And the issue here is, this is like buying something from the black market. If you buy something from the black market, you're buying it from someone who stole it, basically, okay, or maybe, right, depending on what black market. But can you assume, if you think there's a likelihood that someone stole something, right, how does that affect you? Are you involved in a mitzvah ba'avera? So it all depends on how ownership rights work, right? You want to be the proper owner of this where you own it and not from having stolen it. So my time, so they say, what's the reason here? Stam ovdei kochavim gazlanei ara'ata nidu. So the first thing they say is the average pagan worshiper has stolen their land from someone. Okay. Rashi adds, if you look in Rashi, the Dibur Matcha, maybe he had a different girsa. My time, stam akum gazle ara'ata Yisrael nidu. He claims that they steal land from Jews. Now, it's not clear. Some people say, no. They steal land in general from Gentiles also. Okay, there's a whole thing. Does it matter whether it was stolen from Gentiles or whether it was stolen from Jews? It seems from Bava Kama that it shouldn't make a difference. Still considered stolen. So I'm not going to get into those details, but it's an interesting machloket. Why Rashi adds Yisrael is a good question. Again, maybe his version of the Gemara had that word there. But let's just assume any kind of stolen. They generally steal land. Because they steal land, what's the problem? Now, if they stole the land, then again, we would assume, what do we say? When someone steals, it becomes their own. So when they sell it to us, they're actually selling something that is now owned by them. It shouldn't really be a problem. The issue is that there's this concept, v'karka eina nigzelet. Land cannot be stolen. What does that mean, land can't be stolen? I could steal your land. What it means is that if I steal your land, the concept, we talked about Yeush and transfer of ownership, that I now own it, that's not true. That only applies to movable items. But if it's something that's not movable land, there's no such concept of I become the new owner when I steal it. Why is that? So there's several reasons given. I'll give you one main reason. The idea is that since, right, if you steal my computer, I'll never find it again. I don't know where my computer is right now. But if you steal an item like land, I know where my land is. I could come back and claim my land. I don't ever really give up the hope of trying to get my land back. It could be at a certain point, right? We fought in court and you kind of proved it with forged documents or something. But theoretically, my land is always there. I know where it is. So there's a concept that I can still claim that this is mine. Okay, there's other reasons given as to how this works. Again, more for an in-depth shiur on the Gemara. But right now, we're going to accept this concept that land can't be stolen. That means that these hadassim are growing in the stolen property. So we don't want the avankari to cut it directly because they're basically cutting something that was from stolen. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, I told you have to wait till we understand. Hilkach ligzizua inhu. Let the Gentiles, okay, these ovdei kochavim, these pagan worshipers, let them cut it. Ki hechi de lahavu yeush ba'alim biyadayu didhu. The idea is when they cut it, now we have something that's movable, that was stolen. When they cut it, they've done an action that is basically stealing it from the property. At that point, there's going to be yeush on the part of the owners. The owners are going to say, oh, we'll never get these back anymore. And then those Gentiles, the pagan worshipers, are going to be the owners of that hadassim. Now, what did we say? Just yeush doesn't help you. It's still considered stolen. So if the avankari had cut them, they would be considered, it would still be a mitzvah haba ba'avera because the hadassim were stolen by them. But now what's going to happen? If the ovdei kochavim cut it, they're the ones who stole it. Vishinui hareshut biyadaychu. This is like buying on the black market. When they sell it to the avankari, what happens? The avankari now, we have not just yeush, but we have shinui reshut. We've now changed owners. At that point, it's no longer considered a stolen item because we've now had, that already removes it from being stolen. The fact that you bought it on the black market, it's already changed owners from the one who stole it, so it's okay. But now they say, wait a minute. And now, sorry, I skipped a step. Yeush ba'alim biyadayu didhu. The yeush happens, sorry, I missed a step. At this point, the yeush happens. Right. And then, buying on the black market would be a problem. The avankari is still problematic, but now they sell to us. And then there's shinoi reshut. They bought it from the avankari. There was yeush in the hands of the Gentiles. Then shinoi reshut to the avankari, from there to us. At that point, 1 second, I have to just double check something. Right. Then you need right. Right. So karka and excelet to avankari biadan. Right. Sorry. Okay, I made a mistake. The yeush happens when the Gentiles cut it. There's still no yeush. When it switches, they sell it to the avankari. Then there's yeush because they've kind of removed it from the property. Then when the avankari sell it to the Jews who are buying it for their lulavim, then it works then we have shinoi reshut, moves into their hands. But now they say, and this is why I got confused, because then they say, no, that doesn't make any sense. Because sof ki gazizu avankari lehavu yeush ba'alim biyadayu v'shinoi reshut biyadan. You don't need that extra step. If the avankari themselves cut them, it's really, this is what I explained by accident earlier. They tried to say you need 3 stages. But they're saying, no, it's enough that the avankari cut it. Then there's yeush at the time of the cutting. And then shinoi reshut when they sell it to us. So that should be fine. So why did Rav Huna suggest, I think it was Rav Huna, right? Why did he suggest that? Let me just double check. Yeah. Rav Huna said, no, have the ovdei kochavim cut it. That's because he said, lo tzricha b'oshano da avankari gufayu. These middlemen, well, it's true, right? I think about my son used to sell lulav and etrog when he was in high school. So there's a whole racket going on in Israel of all these, they have all these younger sellers and it's this crazy racket the way it works. I'm sure it works in other places the same. Anyway, he used to sell. Now he would sell, but he would also get a set for himself, right? So the sellers were Jews, so they would be using it for themselves as well. So while it's true that it would be enough if they cut it, the yeush would happen in their hands. Then they would sell it to the Jews and there would be shinoi reshut. And already the Jews would have something that wasn't considered stolen items, which really means kind of like buying off the black market would kind of be okay, I guess. But again, it's a little removed from the black market because they're not really the ones stealing. But the problem is, and the issue is like this, when they cut the hadassim off of property that was stolen, what they're actually doing is really stealing because even though they're maybe paying the Gentile owners for it, but those Gentiles aren't really the owners. So when they take something, they're in effect stealing it from the original owner. So now the Yeush could happen in their hands and then the Shinoi Rishut when they sell it. But what about them themselves? They themselves can't use them. And since they're the peddlers, they're obviously going to use what they cut for themselves, and then they're going to end up with stolen item. So therefore, that doesn't work. But now the Gemara says, wait a minute, but there's other methods. There's all sorts of different methods that remove it from being considered stolen. So far we started with Yeush. We started to say maybe Yeush is enough, right? When the owner gives up hope of ever getting it back, it becomes yours, but still that's considered stolen. That's not enough to get away from having this item considered stolen. Now we said, well, Yeush with Shinoi Reshut is sufficient. But the Avankari don't have that if they cut it directly. But now they're going to suggest maybe some other way they could acquire it. They could have it taken out, remove it from being considered stolen. How would that be? They could acquire it as their own by doing some sort of change to it. When you change some item, okay, if you say Yeush isn't enough for it to be considered your own, but Yeush together with changing it makes it your own. So for example, if I, take a piece of wood and I carve something out of it and I make it into something different, then it becomes my own. So what do they say? Here, what do we do with the hadassim? Well, we bind it together with the lulav. That's a maaseh. We're doing something to it. So they say, kasavar lulav ein sarich eged. Maybe he held, Rav Huna, who suggested this, maybe he held that lulav doesn't need to be bound. And therefore, you can be yotzei your mitzvah without it being bound. So therefore, there is no ma'aseh necessarily involved here. Okay, we're going to get to this machloket about whether lulav needs eged or not. Get to that later. The intim tzalomer lulav tzarich eged. Even if you say, though, lulav needs to be bound, even so shinoi ma'aseh wouldn't help. Why? Eged shinoi tzarich eged shinoi chozer lebriatohu. You're not really changing anything. It's a shinoi. If I bind it together with my lulav, I can just as easily unbind it and the hadas remains unchanged. It's not like taking wood and carving something out of it where I can't return it to its original state. In order for shinoi maaseh to work, I have to actually do something that changes it fundamentally, not something that will go back to its original state. The shinoi chozer lebriato, if it can easily go back to its original state, lo shmei shinoi. That's not considered a shinoi. Now they suggest one other suggestion. Maybe Shinoi Maaseh wouldn't work here, but maybe we'll suggest something else that will work for these Avankari. By changing its name, that also gives me ownership. How so? Now, why are we changing names here? Demikara Havale Asa. Originally, Hadassim were called Asa. That was the name for Hadassim. Vehashta Hoshana. And now we call it Hoshana. We've changed the name by using it for Sukkot. We call it something else. We don't call it Hadassim. We call it, or Asa. We call it Hoshana. So what do they answer? That's not really a change of name because Hadassim are always, some people call them Hoshana even before we use them for the holiday, in which case it's not really a serious change of name. Okay, so again, what have we seen just to summarize? Different stages at which one could say ownership changes. Right, in stolen items. One is Yeush alone. Another is Yeush with Shinoi Reshut, changing owners, right? That we need that extra stage for it to really become your own, to be not considered stolen. Another is Yeush and Shinoi Maaseh, changing it. And another one is Shinoi Shem, okay? In any case, we've proven that in this case, you don't necessarily have any of those, which is why they asked the Avankari, Rav Huna said, make sure that the Gentiles cut it themselves so that the Shinoi Reshut happens when the Avankari get it. So it goes again from the people cutting it. That's when the Yeush happens because Karka is not an exelet. So only once you cut it can we assume then the owners will give up rights. Then when you sell it to somebody else, already it can be their own and it's fine. You don't need any extra change, which means buying something on the black market seems like it would be considered yours. It's not like you stole it yourself. Therefore, it's not a stolen item. You didn't do anything wrong, in which case you can use it for the mitzvah of lulav. So we learned a lot of interesting things about ownership rights and theft and how it works. Tomorrow, we're going to get to a very interesting story about a woman who claims that the rabbi stole their sukkah, stole the wood and built their sukkah with it. So wait till we hear tomorrow's story. More on that tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.